All right, guys, let's talk Kentucky football. They've got Zach Calzada coming in at quarterback, transfer from Incarnate Word. He's been all over the SEC, Texas A&M, Auburn. I'm going to make a pretty bold prediction for the Wildcats. I think by week 6, week 7, Cutter Boley's going to be getting a lot of reps at quarterback. He's Calzada's kind of a bridge piece for Cutter Boley, but I just think that couple games in, it may not even take till week 6, but Boley's going to be QB1 before the season's over. Their running back room is interesting. Dante Dowdell's going to be the starter, but it's kind of going to be a committee. He's a transfer from Nebraska. I really like Jamarian Wilcox. I think he's going to have a big piece of the snap share, the carry share for them this year. And I think he could be their breakout running back. They do have a few other guys in Patterson, who was there last year. He carried the ball a little bit for them. And then they brought McGowan in from New Mexico State. I think he started his career at Oklahoma. So, you'll probably have 4 guys get some carries on in the running back room for them. When you move over to the wide receiver, you've got Kendrick Law, who, started his career at Alabama. I think he is probably going to be their number one guy. Didn't get a ton of action last year. I think he had 10 receptions for Alabama, but he's a guy who coming out of high school had really high expectations for him. So he should have a pretty solid season. Jamori Macklin was a guy who was there last year, who, played a little bit for him. And then JJ Hester is a transfer who's going to get a little run. He was at Missouri and Oklahoma. And then Troy Stellato from Clemson. I think he's going to play a lot too. They have a pretty deep wide receiver room. Hardly Gilmore is going to get some action too. They're going to rotate 5, 6, 7 guys quite a bit through their running back room. What I think is going to be their biggest strength on offense is going to be their offensive line. It is a pretty big overhaul, but they brought in, 5 transfers for the offensive line who are really all expected to be starters from the get-go. They may keep their 2 guards from last year in Burton and Farmer as starters, but they brought 5 guys in who are going to compete for time. So their offensive line is going to be, their biggest plus on the offensive side. I don't know from the tight end standpoint, Josh Caddis is probably going to be their starter, really good blocker. Outside of that, they did bring in Henry Boyer from Illinois, so he's going to be more of their receiver at the tight end room. But I think, their biggest level of success is going to be the offensive line. They really reinvented that room through the transfer portal. Wide receivers a deep room with some talent, not a lot of proven talent, but the quarterback position is going to be the biggest question mark for them, in my opinion. What do you guys think of their offense?
I just want to chime in and say I have faith in Zach Calzada. I've always liked the kid. I liked him when he was in high school here in Georgia. I liked him at every stop that he's been at, all 12 of them between his high school career and now finishing up his last year in college. But it won't surprise me at all if he goes the distance this year. I could see him throwing for 2,800 yards and being able to keep teams honest enough with his feet. I don't know. It's Kentucky. What are you going to do? I just don't think that they have the horses to compete week in, week out. I don't think they're Mississippi State bad, but I don't think they're very good this year either.
Yeah, and I'll touch on their schedule in a little bit, but they've got a pretty tough SEC slate this year. So, I do think they do get back to bowl eligibility, but I don't think 9 wins is in the realm for them at all this year.
They have two freshman wide receivers that early in their camp have been really well spoken of, and that's Montavian Quisenberry and Cameron Miller. They think that they're going to play, like you said, they got a deep room, but they don't have like a true over the top guy. And I think they think Quisenberry has a chance to be that for them. Kind of like Larry said too, Calzada is one of those guys that he doesn't like just wow you and you think this guy's going to throw for 3,500. But looking at his numbers over the years, he doesn't throw double digit interceptions. So kind of like Kentucky plays. They play well within themselves. They do enough to win the games that they should. And so I think that's kind of where they'll probably fall again. And Calzada may give them more than we initially thought that he would. I think Larry, your estimate of 2,800 yards is probably a good estimate. And then when you look at the running backs that they've got, the arrangement that they have in the running back room, Dowdell is going to be the hammer, and Patterson is going to be, the guy that can run. And they got four guys in there that can run. They may be better offensively than we said. You're 100% right on their offensive line, especially the interior of their offensive line, which ties back into that running game. And Calzada is, if you give him play action pass, when he was at A&M, if he could run play action, he was pretty good. And he still is the quarterback that beat Alabama, and that counts for something. So I'm not high on Kentucky, but there is some potential in the room.
I think the biggest thing that's going to hurt them is the loss of Brown.
Yeah, the loss of Barry and Brown's gonna definitely hurt them because they don't have a true wide receiver one. And if Calzada's playing well, I mean he's coming off a great year at Incarnate Word. I think he threw for 4,000 yards or 35 touchdowns. So he definitely has some talent. I just think that there's going to be more things potentially go wrong to where they're like, okay, maybe we start to get Bowley ready for next season. Now, if he goes the distance all year, that means things were firing on all cylinders to some degree for him. So I didn't mean to discredit him because, yeah, he did beat Alabama and, had a phenomenal season last year. And, if he didn't get hurt, he probably would have started for Auburn a couple years ago, too.
Dane Key was another wide receiver that transferred from there that was very proven. So again, the portal giveth and the portal taketh away.
Yeah, they definitely rebuilt their offense. I think they're going to end up starting, 6 or 7 transfers. Jamori Macklin's going to be the only wide receiver who potentially starts, who was there last year. And he was good in his wide receiver role as wide receiver 3 or 4 last year,
And
but
he was
now
a
he's going to be depended on a little more.
Yeah, and he was a North Texas transfer last year.
Yeah. So on the defensive side, they do bring back a few key pieces. I'm pretty high on Jordan Lovett this year. I think he's going to be a leader of the defense at free safety. But jumping to their defensive line, defensive ends, yeah, they've got David Gusta, Washington State transfer, who's going to rotate in some with Khalil Saunders. They're kind of battling for the defensive tackle one position. I think Gusta may beat him out. They've got Jaden Williams at nose tackle. I always mess this guy's name up, but Humphrey Grace, the South Dakota transfer, is going to be starting at defensive end for them. Yeah, I think he could be a bit of a breakout candidate for them. I've heard a lot of good things about him in fall camp. He did, through a couple years at South Dakota, 26 tackles for loss, 15 sacks. And, 9.5 of those sacks were last year over there. So, he's going to be a bright spot. Another transfer that I really like at linebacker Jack is Cam Olds. He's a transfer from Kent State. He had 6 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, 42 total tackles last year. I think he's going to be a big piece for them. Landon Watson is going to be a starting linebacker for them from Marshall. He had 4 tackles for loss last year, 65 total tackles. And then Rayner is a guy who's returning, played a little bit of a reserve role last year, showed a little bit of flashes at time. I think he finished with 4 or 5 tackles for loss. The other safety starting for them is going to be Ty Bryant. He's another guy that I like. But Martell's Carter, a freshman, I think he's going to get a little run at the safety spot. Scott Quashid is going to be their starting kind of nickel back guy this year. He's a guy who played really sparingly last year. He's a true sophomore, so he's going to get some run for him for sure. I think, the biggest plus for them is going to be their safety room on defense, and their cornerbacks with Nichols, Waller, and Hardaway. All of those guys, have few skins on the wall. I like DJ Waller the most. He was at Michigan a couple years ago, but Hardaway's another guy who had a couple interceptions last year. He was at Cincinnati a few years ago. So they do have some depth at the cornerback position. And then, I left out probably my favorite linebacker for him, Alex Safari. He had 35 solo tackles last year, 11 tackles for loss. So right now he has been running with the twos, but they're going to be a little bit of a linebacker group by committee as well. So I think overall, though, their secondary is going to be their best, their experienced corner group with some dependable safeties, that have high IQs. But a lot of it's going to be outside of Jordan Lovett, who really develops into a leader in that secondary group for them. What are your thoughts on their defense?
I think defensively, kind of like what you said. Baseball, football, you want to be strong up the middle. To your point, Bryant and Lovett give them safeties up the middle. They've got 3 linebackers with experience that I think give them strength up the middle. They just need some defensive tackles that'll be that'll eat up blockers to free those linebackers from that. And I do think they have a little bit of depth at defensive tackle with Josiah Hayes, Gusta, Austin Ramsey, Kalen Edwards is a freshman. So not a lot of depth at nose tackle. But again, one position that I really like that you mentioned is their defensive ends. I really like Cam Olds. When you look at 42 tackles, that's a lot of tackles from the defensive end position. So he's going to be active. So, I look at their defense as a solid defense. I agree that the secondary is their strength with good linebackers, solid defensive ends, solid defensive tackles. My question on them is the depth factor. A lot of these guys that we've talked about are good players. What do they got behind them? And if, let's say, they lost 2 or 3 of those key guys to injuries, what's that do to their defense? And I think if that were to happen, you'd see their season get very challenging if they lose people. To me, they're a lot like Arkansas. They've got some talent, but the depth factor, if they get people hurt, it's really going to hurt them.
Yeah, I'm with you there. They don't have a ton of depth. Outside defensive tackle isn't their strongest position, but it is by far their deepest. Once you get out of their top 3 linebackers, things can get a little hazy there too. And then, you look at safety, if Lovett and Bryant, are out anytime, they really turned a couple true freshmen and then a couple reserve guys who haven't really played much in their time so far. Moving over to their schedule, they've
Hold
got
on
a
just a minute.
pretty
Sweet. So what you think? We're going to get the Wildcats or the Mildcats on defense?
I I'm kind of meh on Kentucky as a whole this year. I think their defense is going to be better than their offense. I think they have a little more depth there, and I think that I like Stoops as a coach. I just it's just really hard for me to buy in because if you look up and down the roster, the talent. If you, either of you guys answer this question, how many NFL guys are on that roster right now?
Yeah, very few. Love it. Maybe Bryant, maybe one of the cornerbacks. There's not a lot.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. It's just bottom line is talent wins games, and I just don't think Kentucky has enough of this year. Now it's a lot's going to depend on how those transfers gel, and that's just such a big thing for everybody now because there's everybody's going to rely on transfers from Texas to LSU to Georgia to Kentucky to everybody. Everyone's going to rely on their transfers to come in and make an impact. Some teams just have more than others.
All right, so DMAC, go ahead and run down that schedule. Sweets is leaning towards the Wildcats. I was starting to feel like they might have a little Wildcat in them, but go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, they open the season with Toledo coming in. That's going to be a win. Now they play a really early SEC game, September 6th. They've got Ole Miss coming into town. I think it's going to be a close game for a while, but I think Ole Miss is going to win that one. I just don't think Kentucky's defense, they're going to be solid, but I don't think their defense is going to hold Ole Miss's offense to 24 points, which I think is all it's going to take to win that one. Whichever team scores 24, 27 probably wins that one. And I've got Ole Miss like 27-17, 27-14, winning that one. They do get Eastern Michigan week 3. I think that's a win. They get a bye week, and then September 27th, they travel to South Carolina. That game, I think, might be a night game. Either way, I'm taking South Carolina. Sellers is still going to be healthy at that point. So that's a road game to Carolina. The following week, they've got another road game to Georgia. I don't see them winning that one either. I think the Bulldogs are going to be too good at home. And it's tough to play back-to-back weeks on the road in the SEC. So through 5 games, I've got them at 2-3. They get a bye week, and then they host Texas. Going into week 6, 7. Arch Manning's going to be rolling a little bit at this point. I've got Texas winning that one. Then they get Tennessee at home. That's another one that I just think, even with Tennessee, not, we don't know what they're going to look like at quarterback with Aguilar yet. I still have Tennessee winning that one. And then they travel to Auburn. If Auburn, with the amount of talent they have this year, unless this is just a game that Hugh Freeze doesn't get the team prepared for, I'm taking Auburn in this one too. Then they get Kentucky. They travel, or well, they get Florida at home. I think that DJ Lagway, if he's healthy, he's going to be rolling at this point of the season. And I've got Florida beating Kentucky at home. But then things get a little easier. They do get Tennessee Tech at home. That's going to be a win. And then they travel to Vanderbilt. I am calling an upset on the road at Vanderbilt. That's going to be their SEC win this year. And then I think they're going to beat Louisville to round out the season. So that does put them at 5-7. 2 games that I think they could potentially sneak out of. Tennessee is one, with them being at home, and potentially Ole Miss could be another game they could potentially sneak out. Stoops is a good coach, and typically wins a game that he shouldn't win every year. So I've got them at 5-7. I think their ceiling is honestly 7-5 this year. So I think there's a good chance they can pick up one more and get bowl eligible, but I'm gonna roll with 5-7 for now.
I
What you
think
think,
that's fair.
Sweets?
I go ahead.
I tend to agree, and I really think their ceiling is probably 6-6. Man, they got a tough schedule when you look at that. And Ole Miss is a type of team you could get a win when you look, they won at Oxford last year against a very good Ole Miss team. I still look back at that game and don't know how they won that game. That game kept Ole Miss out of the playoffs. Ole Miss could have won. Every loss that they had last year were games that they were the better team, and they somehow managed to lose three. I know. Look, Ole Miss offensive line is a challenge right now, and we'll see what Austin Simmons is. But I think they probably win in Kentucky, even though that's a game that could go either way, maybe. Well, maybe not either way, but it's a game that Kentucky could get. Now, when you get down to Tennessee, where I think Tennessee beats Kentucky, is Tennessee's definitely got questions at quarterback, but where they don't have questions is on the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
Tennessee's going to have a good offensive line and a good defensive line. They'll run the ball well, and that will travel on the road. Their defense will travel, and that's going to be one of those games where Kentucky's going to be up for it and hope to get a win because they're going to need it. They're going to be scratching and clawing to try to get bowl eligible. I just think, though, when you play a team that's got dominant people at the line of scrimmage, and maybe that's not you, Kentucky's offensive line will be strong, but Tennessee's defensive line will be able to match up with them. So I don't think they'll get that game. So I think they might get that Ole Miss game, and then they definitely are going to need to somehow pull off Vandy. And yeah, and I don't know if they can beat the Pavia Magic or not, but it's a tough schedule for Kentucky. So
I
based
think they
on
can
that,
beat. I think they'll beat Mississippi
go
State
ahead.
though. I really think they beat Mississippi State early.
I don't think they have Mississippi State this year. They got Ole Miss.
Oh, I thought. Oh, I apologize. I thought you'd said they played them in week 2. DMAC. I apologize. I don't have the schedule up in
Oh
front
yeah,
of me.
no, you're good. Yeah, it's Ole Miss week 2. For Kentucky's sake, I wish it was Mississippi State. I just as kind of a baseline, I have Mississippi State not winning a conference game with a easier conference schedule than Kentucky. I hated to have Kentucky not win an SEC game, so I had to take them upsetting Vandy just because I feel like they are, a couple steps above Mississippi State.
Sweet, you're just used
I
to them
agree
playing
with you.
this.
They're not going to beat Ole Miss.
When you look at their schedule, they've got one of the toughest conference schedules. Some of these teams we've already went over. We think South Carolina has the potential to win 9 games. We haven't done Georgia yet, I don't think, but they got the potential to win 10 or 11. Texas potential to win 10 or 11. Tennessee will win 8 or 9. Auburn, 8 to 10 games that they could win. Florida, same thing. They got a tough SEC schedule, and Vanderbilt, who was a competitive team last year, they don't have anybody. They don't play Mississippi State. They don't play Arkansas. They don't play teams at the bottom of the league potentially. So it's a tough. They play a lot of teams at the top of the league. They don't play Alabama. They don't play LSU. Outside of those two teams, and man, they got a tough SEC schedule. So based on that, I gotta agree with Sweets from a minute ago. I think it's the Wildcats this year, not the Wildcats.
Yeah, and it's tough, September 27th through November 8th. It's at South Carolina, at Georgia, Texas and Tennessee at home, at Auburn, Florida at home. I mean, that is probably six of your top eight SEC teams.
And Stoops has kind of spoiled that fan base. He went through a stretch there where he won 8, 9 games a year. And it's going to be an interesting period when they go through that tough stretch of games, how their fans react, how their administration reacts, and that. Because it just does not set up well for them this year.
Yeah, I mean, if he's 4-8 again,
Go ahead, Sweets.
Go ahead.
if he's 4-8 again this year, he might be he's already on the hot seat a little bit with their fan base. But I mean, 5-7, 4-8, that's not going to be a bounce back year, and there's probably some discussions on the Mark Stoops future. I mean, at Kentucky, I don't know how high their ceiling's ever going to be, even though he had some success with them.
I think he's taken them to their ceilings as a football program, and I honestly don't know that they can do a lot better than him as a coach. I think he's a pretty solid coach.
Just
He's
looking
just
here,
very
the
limited.
Stoops buyout, it would be around 37 million.
So I don't know if they would. I don't know
He's
if they
they
could pay that.
Nah, he's
They
there.
certainly would.
Like Kelly's not leaving LSU after this year. Stoops
That's
to go 12 and 37 million is keeping him there. Doesn't matter. It's too much.
That
Basketball coach, they might buy him
well, that
out.
would get into their basketball money, and
Yeah, if he was their basketball coach, they might
right,
buy him out for 37 million, but not football.
they're gonna fast forward to basketball season, and they're gonna keep him. They're not their ability to go out and pay for players on the basketball side. And look, he had a tough year last year. When you look at the history of that program, he's been more successful than just about any coach that they've got. So he probably deserves at least one more year anyway. The fan base won't feel that way. The media will be all over him. But in reality, he's done better there than just about any other coach.
Yeah, I mean, as just, an outsider looking in, I mean, I would say that he, is their best coach in a long time there. Led them to he got to 10 wins, what, twice, or was it just once?
I think he did twice, and he went through a stretch there where he had 8 wins a season, 9 wins, and then popped a couple of tens. I mean, he had some really good years there, and I think he's their all-time winningest coach at this point.
Yeah, I think he is. Enough. Yeah, he was yeah, 2018 he was 10-3, 8-5. 2021 he was 10-3. He's won three Citrus Bowls, two Citrus Bowls, and a Gator Bowl for him. 2022's where it's gotten a little tougher for him, 7-6, then 7-6, then 4-8 last year. But that's really when NIL became a lot more prevalent, and Kentucky's always going to choose basketball over football. So some of those, that drop off isn't necessarily to blame him, kind of similar to, LSU basketball or, some of these other schools with sports. It's just not the priority from administration. So that is just kind of Kentucky football ceiling moving forward until they put more money into football is probably 7-5, 8-4 on a really good year. But they're more of a 5-7 to 7-5 team every year.
I think so. And to your point, 2018 they went 6 years in a row with a winning record. So, and that's not the norm for Kentucky. And like you said, 2 10-win seasons in there, a couple 8-win seasons in there, and he took over a program that was 2-10 before he got there. So he had to build that and get that team to perform better, and he did. It's a tough place. It's a tough place to win. They don't have a lot of in-state recruiting that helps them be successful. They get some, and then they recruit out of Ohio pretty well. Go to there and take some players that are not going to Ohio State. And they've done pretty good with the portal. You mentioned Cam Olds going back to their team. Like I said, I really think he'll be good. And some of the players they got out of the portal this year. But again, it's just that's a tough place to win. I think he gets another year, but it's going to be tough. That's sledding uphill there. Hopefully the schedule
Yeah.
will break a little easier for him next year.
Yeah, he definitely needs a bit of an easier schedule in 2026.
The one thing that he's consistently done though is beat Louisville, and for the Kentucky
Yes.
fans, that is an important win for them.
Yeah, I mean that's likely their bowl game this year.
Yes, he's 8 and
So,
5 against Louisville.
and I think 9-5 after this year. I'm rolling with him in that one.
I think they do get that win again this year.